watching Canadian Muslim news on Muslim Network TV. From Toronto, Ontario, I'm Katherine Bullock. Assalamu alaikum and greeting of peace. Up today, we're going to have an interview with Taha Ghayyur, who's the Executive Director of Justice for All Canada, about the Canadian election and Muslim representation. First, some news headlines. New Muslim MPs elected to the 2021 Parliament. 12 Muslim MPs were elected to the 2021 Canadian Parliament. This year, dozens of Muslims ran in the elections from all the main parties. 12 were elected, 3 for the first time, according to Muslim leaders. Out of those 12, 11 are Liberal and 1 is Conservative. In the Ontario riding of Peterborough-Kawartha, Mariam Monsef lost her seat to Conservative Michelle Ferrari. Mariam Monsef was the Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Rural Economic Development. She was elected in 2015 for the first time as the Member of Parliament for Peterborough. Job vacancies and hourly wages increased to an all-time high. According to Statistics Canada, the Canadian labour market showed about 732,000 job vacancies in the second quarter of 2021. This was an increase of 25.8% compared to the same quarter of the last 2 years. Construction job vacancies increased by 46.7%. This is the highest record for the construction sector since 2015. Vacancies in accommodation and food services reached an all-time high with an increase of slightly more than 89,000. New vaccine certificate system comes into effect in Ontario today. In Ontario today, the new vaccine certificate system comes into effect. People going to dine in restaurants, nightclubs, gyms, sports facilities, and other venues must present proof of vaccination as well as their government ID. Places will accept people without vaccination if they have a doctor's note for medical exemption. The province will fine businesses who do not use the system. In the beginning, however, they will emphasize education instead of enforcement. Premier Doug Ford asked Ontarians to have patience with the new system. Meanwhile, Ontario reported 463 new COVID cases. Prince Andrew sued in New York court for alleged sexual abuse. Britain's Prince Andrew is being sued in a New York court for alleged sexual abuse of a minor. In Monday's filing, Virginia Giuffre claims she was lent out for underage sex by the late US financier Jeffrey Epstein. The suit alleges Giuffre was regularly abused by Epstein, who gave her to other powerful men for sexual purposes. She claims Andrew sexually abused her at a London socialite's home more than 20 years ago when she was 17. Prince Andrew vehemently denies the claims. That's it for the news. We turn now to an interview with Taha Ghayyur, Executive Director of Justice for All Canada, about Muslim representation in the new Parliament. We have with us today Taha Ghayyur, who is the Executive Director of Justice for All Canada. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on today, and I look forward to having an interesting conversation.
So we're here to talk about the new Parliament, specifically Muslim representation. Give us a quick overview of the Muslim MPs who've been elected.
Yes, so we have, as of today, for the federal election 2021, we are talking about 12 Muslim identifying candidates who are now, of course, going to be serving in the Parliament. So it's a good news for a Canadian Muslim community and, of course, the wider Canadian community. Out of these 12 candidates, 11 are from the Liberal Party of Canada and 1 is from the Conservative Party. 8 out of these 12 are from the Greater Toronto Area, and 1 is from Ottawa, another 1 from Vancouver, and 1 from Edmonton, and 1 from Montreal. And out of these 12 ridings, I guess, we're talking about 3 candidates who actually have been elected in new regions where Muslim MPs had not been previously elected. One is Brampton Centre, which is Shafqat Ali, and we're talking about Ottawa, as in the center, another one being Nasser Naqvi, and the third one is from Vancouver. We're talking about Talib Nur Muhammad.
That kind of distribution, you said mostly the highest number in the GTA, and then some from Ottawa, Edmonton, Vancouver, and British Columbia. That sort of maps the way the Muslim population is distributed over Canada. Do you think that's sort of relevant in terms of electing Muslim MPs?
Well, it is. And I mean, and this is why if you were to, first of all, demographics, of course, matter. And this is why we saw quite a few changes, even from the 2019 elections in terms of the candidates who have now been elected in the parliament. So just a bit of a quick comparison for you. What has really changed is, what hasn't changed is the number of Muslim MPs in the parliament. It was 12, historic, and I guess, addition to the parliament in 2019. It's the first time we had this many MPs elected to the parliament who happen to be Muslim in 2019. What has changed since then is three of them are no longer there, and we have 3 new additions, really. So we lost 2 MPs last year because of some ethical concerns, allegations about ethics. So they sat out as independents and were not reelected this year in 2021. And one of them, unfortunately, is a significant loss for the Muslim liberal, I guess, caucus or Muslim liberal community, and that is Maryam Munsif, who was a minister. Unfortunately, she is the only one who didn't get reelected among all the MPs who ran this time around from last year. So we are back to square one in that sense. And yes, you can see the demographics changing. What surprised me when I was looking at number of Muslim candidates running across Canada was I saw so many people running from Alberta who happen to be Muslim or identify themselves Muslims. And we can get into that more specifically. But yes, what is obvious is Canadian Muslim population typically is more centered around the major metropolitan cities. And this is where we are seeing Canadian Muslim MPs, of course, making a difference as well.
So you mentioned the loss of Maryam Munsif. Do you have any sense of what might have contributed to her loss?
I mean, there's a lot that is being said about this, and it's hard to, of course, pinpoint what exactly is the reason. It could well be, of course, maybe change in demographics in her writing, but but more specifically, it seems that what did cost her election is her, I guess, her unfortunate remark or address to the Taliban as our brothers, which of course, or our Taliban brothers, which of course did not sit well with a lot of people, even though, she can justify it as she did. Contextually and culturally speaking, this is a norm in Afghanistan and many Eastern cultures to address people as brothers, whether they are people you like or you don't like. But unfortunately, that is that has irked a lot of people, including voters, it seems, and seems like they have spoken in her writing.
Right. Well, I mean, the Taliban is still considered a terrorist organization from the Canadian government point of view. So let's not get into that topic, though. Let's ask some other questions about representation in a more sort of abstract philosophical sense. What difference does it make having Muslims in parliament?
Well, obviously the one major difference, as we know, representation makes is having diversity of people who can speak for themselves. So rather than somebody out there speaking on our behalf, you now have a Muslim of an Arab origin or Pakistani origin or Somali origin who can speak for themselves and for the community. And of course, keeping in mind that Canadian Muslim community is not a monolith. Canadian Muslim community is not does not necessarily even speak with one voice. And we are really a group of diverse Muslim communities with our own lived experiences. Those lived experiences need to be represented in all spheres of public life, including Parliament. So that is one aspect of representation that matters in every sphere, whether it's media or the politics. That being said, it's also representation also changes the way you look at minorities. You look at people whom you don't necessarily look like or speak like or think like, perhaps at times, because one of the things that I remember one of the first Muslim MPs told us once is how within his own party, a party that is typically beloved to Canadian Muslims for the past at least 2 to 3 decades, within his own party, of course, there were people who had all sorts of bigoted ideas, and at the least, there's a lot of ignorance. And just this MP's presence in the caucus, in the parliament, made an incredible difference in how people addressed, how people talked about, for instance, 9/11, how people talked about, so-called, say, Muslim extremists or terrorists, and how even they dealt with issues of violence and terrorism, for instance, and so on. So I think representation has a critical role to play, even the language in the way we address issues and the nuanced ways we look at and the nuances that we should be looking at on any issue involving racialized minorities and religious minorities.
Is that why you used the word in the beginning, identified Muslims or self-identifying Muslims? Is that an important adjective?
It is, of course, because even when I go back to a list of all the candidates from our databases to look at and see who ran from which party, of course, I can assume, and we can assume by looking at Muslim sounding names or Arab sounding names, that they're Muslim. But it is important at the same time that it needs to come from the candidates and individuals themselves, because we don't want to, label people without actually themselves speaking for themselves and, of course, identifying themselves as such, whatever they are.
So just one question to wrap up. It's kind of a big one, but just a wrapping up question. In the election campaign, Muslim groups were saying there's not enough focus on Islamophobia. People aren't talking about it enough. The party platforms aren't addressing it very well, if at all. And do you think that having these 12 MPs in Parliament then will help advance a anti-Muslim racist agenda, help prevent or help address the structural Islamophobia that people are pointing to?
I mean, that's a very good question. Of course, time would tell. We do hope that they do become a strong voice on the issue of Islamophobia and fighting Islamophobia and all forms of phobias and all forms of hate. I truly hope that they become genuine voices of peace, justice, and human rights for all. And in particular, with the significant rise and exponential rise in Islamophobia in Canada, both structural and violent forms specifically, we want to make sure that these MPs really do take our voices of Canadian Muslim community over there. And as we conclude, I mean, I would say, as the demographics change, what is encouraging and good to see is that Canadian Muslims are no longer married to one party, and which was always the Liberal Party. And of course, we understand that Liberal Party has made significant strides in reaching out to the Canadian Muslim community, and hence we had 11 plus or 12 plus Muslim candidates who actually won. But what was heartening to see at the same time in the wider sphere throughout Canada is, I would say, again, a record number of Muslim candidates who ran for elections from across every single party, across coast to coast. We saw Muslim MPs, Muslims were running for election, which is, I think, very interesting. Just in the riding of Mississauga, 4 out of 6 NDP candidates were Muslim. 2 of them wear hijab. One of them happens to be president of a mosque, for instance. I saw in Alberta at least 8 or 9 people from 4 to 5 different parties, 4 or 5, not 8 or 9 candidates who were Muslim. From again across different parties. One of them was a party like Maverick Party, for instance. I mean, out in the West. So that is a good sign, and from that perspective, it is a historic election. My estimate is at least 50 Muslim-sounding candidates ran in this election from across Canada for every single party, from every single party you could imagine. They were there representing Muslims, and yes, that is one way to counter Islamophobia and all forms of hate as well as that representation.
Well, unfortunately, we don't have time. There's lots to talk about in that topic. But thank you very much for giving us your time today, Taha Ghayyur, Executive Director, Justice for All Canada.
Thank you.
That's it from us. Join us for our next episode, Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. I'm Katherine Bullock. Stay safe and God bless.